All right. So this one's a bit of a different one, guys, because it's first of all, it's going to start off exactly like most of the other ones, right? Almost every single one that we do, the performance is excellent. I mean, this loan ended up being 16 months. I know on the screen here, if you're reading all the words, it says duration 12 months. That was the original term, but we had a 3-month extension and then a further 1-month extension, which I'll explain. But you can just see it's a perfect loan essentially. $600,000 loan, extended over 16 months, paid 4,500 every single month, no problems, just exactly the way you want things to go. But that doesn't mean there weren't issues, and it's not like this happened without some management. And the story of this particular deal, the reason I picked it to share with everybody is because it really does explain why management or how management contributes to smooth performance. Let's take a look at the actual outcome before we get into the story. So, you have first and foremost a $600,000 loan. You have 100% of the principal returned in 16 months. Look at that interest earned 75,698.63, annualized return of 9%. I think we had 7 investors in this deal. Yes, 7, A through G on the right hand side. You can see investors of all different sizes. Everybody made the same proportionate interest to their investment. And on the borrower side, you have a successful exit back to a bank within 16 months. This was a person who was going through a separation, had to pay out their ex. We had to change title. There was a number of things that needed to be done structurally. But in the end, it was easy to see at the beginning that there was an outcome here that could be favorable for all sides. But it did require some management along the way. So he was able to refinance out of private lending within 16 months, which is great. And it makes the whole private lending experience manageable for the borrower when you can do that in a reasonable period of time. Remember, uh, private mortgages are short-term financing bridges, essentially. And if there's no exit is when it becomes unmanageable and so on. When someone gets stuck in private for 2, 3, 4 years, that's where really they're eroding the equity in their home. Whereas if they're in it for a year or 16 months, like this one, it's very manageable, and essentially, a good means to an end to keep a homeowner in their house. Any questions about the performance or the outcome here? I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Looks pretty straightforward, yeah.
Very
Yeah.
straightforward.
Yeah, and I mean, Nick, you've done a bunch of these. Jeff, so have you. I mean, this is typical, right? From an investor's perspective, this ride, smooth through 12 to 16 months, very, very typical of what the experience typically is. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, like this has pretty much been my experience for the past since 2019, pretty much. Yeah.
It's pretty
Yep,
standard.
mine
Yeah.
too, for sure.
Okay, let's take a look at the story, how it started and how we got to this outcome. So, if we were looking at this and you didn't know about the outcome and you didn't know how things were going to go, what you'd be looking at the beginning is a requested loan amount for $600,000. The borrower has a 650 credit score, not great, not terrible. The property's in rural Sudbury. Okay. And we're talking about someone who needs a private mortgage so that they can refinance their property and pay their ex out of the house. So you've got 2 people on title, but it's going to turn to 1. And remember, a lot of times in a separation, you have 2 borrowers who qualified for bank financing together, but without each other, they don't qualify on their own. That's exactly the situation here. We had a $20,000 collection from the past that was rated R9 on the credit bureau. So if you were unsophisticated, hadn't looked at credit bureaus before, that might scare you. A lot of elements here may scare somebody, but the property is worth 900,000. So you're looking at a 67% of the value is what the borrower needs. So it's a very comfortable loan to value ratio. But the question is, and I'll just ask it to you two, if you were just looking at this, what would give you pause? If you were just getting started trying to determine whether you want to lend to this borrower or not.
I think when the amount gets significant, you've mentioned payment risk in the past. Like this is not a million, obviously, but it's on the higher end, right?
Yeah, well, at 600,000, I think their interest rate was 9%. So you're looking at, 4,500 a month. So it's significant. You got to somebody, just think what you have to be able to do to come up with 4,500 a month just to pay the mortgage, and then you got to pay every other life expense that there is. So yeah, for sure, payment risk would be something to be considered. Don't forget, if you're a private lender looking at this and you're not working with an administrator who can pair you to other investors, you have to come up with the whole 600. No matter how much you like the deal, you got to come up with the whole 600,000 to do this deal. Whereas in our situation, we're able to put 7 investors together. Everybody gets their piece for what they can invest, and they get paid proportionally. So there's that as well.
What does R9 mean?
R9 is the worst credit rating you can have for a trade line. So if you have a credit card, for example, all trade lines on your credit report, and when you open a new account with a new creditor, they start as an R0, okay, and then they become active. And once they start reporting, R1 means it's in good standing, paid as agreed. R2 means 30 days late. R3 means 60 days late. R4, 90 days late. R5, you're getting into collection activity. R7, you're worse than R5. You're in like judgment territory. And then R9 is written off. So at some point, there was a collection item that was written off. And when I say written off, it means like you owed Canadian Tire money and they wrote off the debt and sold it to a collection agent, and the collection agent started to try to collect on it.
I
Does it
see.
make sense?
Yeah.
So R9, R9's as bad as it gets. That's what'll bring your credit score way down. But all of them do, right? You have an R2, an R3, an R4, an R5, an R7. Any of those are going to affect your credit score.
Yeah. I'd be
The
curious
one
as
that's
to
going to, sorry?
I'd be curious as to the weighting, because 650 isn't rock bottom, but R9 is as bad as it gets. So I guess there's like some other stuff balancing the credit in there.
Well, his credit's relatively clean outside of that, and it's from the past. So when you have an R9, it doesn't affect you forever, right? So but it takes longer. It affects you for longer than say an R5 or an R4.
Okay, so he's in recovery.
Yeah. Now let's take a look at the next slide. So always try to remind everybody whenever we go through one of these deals that every private mortgage has imperfections. There's no such thing as a perfect one. If there was, like if the borrower was great and there was no issues, they wouldn't be paying 9% for this money. They'd go to a bank or a trust company. The only reason they're in private is because they don't fit those boxes, and they've got to be here. So we're not looking at whether there's problems. We're looking at, are the problems fixable? So in this case, right, the question we wanted to ask is, okay, this is a complicated situation, but is there a means to an end here? Does it work? Like if this borrower can access the equity in their home to 67%, 600,000, can they A, service the payments for a year, and B, do everything else they need to do? Can we get the ex-spouse off title? Can they pay that person out according to the separation agreement and what they've determined one owes the other? And then is there a viable exit plan at the end? And in this case, we believe the boxes were all checked. So we thought, okay, yes, there's enough money here to pay what's necessary to the spouse. B, we can do the legal work to remove her from title, and then it's just him on title. There was enough income here, and we'll see that in the next slide, that we felt like it was borderline, but it felt like it was manageable enough to get through 12 months. And we were confident in the exit strategy because the loan to value was so low and because the income was good, the property was nice. We felt like this person would be able, with the right guidance, right, through a mortgage broker, would be able to refinance to a bank after the separation was done and so on. And you might say, well, why couldn't they now? Well, because they're going through a separation and they don't meet all the guidelines individually, that they will down the road once things are cleaned up and he's been on his own with his income qualifying him, his credit improving, and all the rest of it. So that just needed some time and needed to get the spouse out of the picture. Let's go to the next slide. So here's what we're looking at first glance, right? So you've got a first mortgage in place for 325, you got a second for 102, and a request of 600, 67% of 900, the appraised value. Credit score of 650, which is middle of the pack. I mean, it's a little below average. We like to see 700 or better, but it's actually it's actually reasonably high for someone looking for a private mortgage, and it's very repairable. So it's not crazy to go from 650 to 700 and open up a lot more options to qualify at a bank. And the purpose was to pay out the first two mortgages, and very simple, actually, very clean purpose. Pay out both mortgages and then buy out the spouse and redo title. Let's take a look at what we found when we went to verify it, right? So you go through a process here. So you take an application, you're in a competitive situation. So you see an opportunity that you like, you want to quote on it, and you want to take the borrower's word in terms of what they put on their application as the truth. But then once you get into an acceptance of terms, you kind of aligned on what you would offer and what they would accept. Then it's time to verify everything and make sure that you're not missing anything. And if you do a good job of this, talking through the proposal stage, then you have less surprises. If you don't do any of that, I mean, it can still work, but you might get surprises when you're doing your verifications. But for us, what does that entail here? Well, you want to check that the first mortgage is actually current, in good standing, up to date. The balance is what they reported it was. We were able to do that. Are there arrears? There were no arrears with anything with respect to income taxes, the mortgages, any of that. No arrears. Property taxes were up to date. Income is stable. We were able to prove that he's making $120,000 a year and has been stably employed for 20 years. Love that. Structural risk. Well, the separation agreement requires not only payout, right? So we need to satisfy the terms of the spousal or the separation agreement, but there's some legal work here that's important to make sure that person is removed from title properly and that you've got clean title for just him as your borrower moving forward. And then is the exit viable? And for us, we thought the exit was viable, but it was going to require a mortgage broker. And this is where I think we differentiate from other private lenders and administrators, is that we're very proactive in helping the borrower through to their exit, like executing the refinance strategy required a broker. We could have just left the borrower to their own resources and said, yeah, you got to go refinance, and then they would have had to figure it out. But how many people do you know who know exactly what to do if they're not related to or know somebody who's a mortgage broker? How many people do you really know who know inside out who all the lenders are to go to outside of the big 3 or 4 or 5 banks, right? So, for us to get involved and be proactive here just opens up a whole lot more doors. I don't think most people know that there are like 40, 50 institutional bank lenders who will give you a mortgage. Like, most people don't know who they all are. So we knew this going in, that this was going to be something we needed to do. And again, verification is so important. You got to check everything before. It's great to align on terms and conditions, and as long as everything is accurate, but you have to do the work to check, and that's a big part of the process. Let's take a look at the next slide.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around paying 4,500 a month on 120, like 120K a year income.
Okay, so when you look at 120,000 in income, one of the things you have to remember, and we have a discussion with the borrower, is this is one of those where we live in a world where people make money in a lot of different ways. You may have your stable income from your job, but you may be making money in other ways, either doing something online or doing something for cash or whatnot. And when you apply to a bank, the bank doesn't care what you tell them, right? That you're making. They care what's provable. When you get to private, we get to take a more common sense approach. Now, you think about it as a borrower. So if I said to you, like, Nick, you're the borrower, and you come to me and you go, hey, listen, I'd like to borrow 600 against my house for 900. How do you feel about that? And at first glance, I go, love it. Like, I feel very safe, right? Because the number one pillar in private lending is the collateral needs to be strong enough to set you free if everything else is wrong. So at 67% of the value, you're kind of saying, well, do I like the house? And in this case, we do. So you look at the house and you go, okay, great. Well, if you're not making the money you say you are, or if everything is backwards and we're wrong about it all, we feel pretty confident we could sell the house and get our money back plus interest. So at that point, I'm kind of shifting the risk from me to you, Nick, kind of saying to you, are you sure you can make the payments? Because I mean, your income can do only so much. Oh yeah, I do some side jobs. I make some money on the side. Don't worry, we'll be fine. And I'm saying, well, you understand, right? Like you understand if you don't make the payments, what happens? And you go, yeah.
Okay,
I
so
go,
you're
okay.
saying at a higher LTV, you wouldn't be as cool with this.
Yeah. So it's not a matter of um being silly about it. Sorry, I keep shifting the mic because I'm having to hold it because my stand is a mess, but it's actually heavier than it probably looks. So the the situation with income is one where you're going to take people at their word if you're comfortable in the loan to value. If this were 80% that he was asking for, I'd certainly want a lot more evidence, not only to protect myself, but also to protect him from biting off more than he can chew. At 67%, I know that even if he ran into a problem, we could refinance it and build a reserve, right? So we could actually help him if it turned out that he did bite off more than he could chew. At 80%, I'm at my ceiling. There's nothing more I can do. So if we write that loan and then he runs into trouble, I can't help him and he can't help himself. That's a problem. Ethically, it's also a problem. Fundamentally, logistically, to get him out, right? And then you run into difficulty. So it's a great question about the income. Income's one of the areas that we can be more flexible than a bank.
I see.
Okay, so is there real equity? There is 67%. We just had a good chat about that. Can the borrower carry the payments? With discipline, yes. So your instinct was correct, Nick. It's tight, right? It's tight, but manageable again for a short period of time. I just can't stress that enough. We are short term financing and we have to be treated that way. Are the issues fixable? Yes. Is the exit realistic? It was. So this situation was repairable. We just had to put the right structure in place. And for us, the right structure included a strong equity cushion, okay, a clear use of funds. So we knew exactly where every dollar was going to go. And then, do we have the right people in place to make sure that the legal part of it gets done right? We did. And is there a path to a refinance within 12 months? Now, we would have hoped it had been 12 months. It ended up taking a bit longer. Guess why it took longer?
The separation, the divorce.
No, actually,
No.
simpler than that.
Oh.
And this is not something that you wouldn't expect from people who are in private. Is um, he just didn't get his affairs in order fast enough to qualify at a bank. He needed guidance. He needed not just a broker to find him a lender, but he needed someone to organize his affairs because, again, remember, not all his income was provable. So there are ways for you to, as a person who's making cash on the side or doing side jobs, there's a way to get that income to help you qualify at a bank, but you need guidance. And he didn't get guidance throughout the term until 3 months left in the term when we started to get involved and ask questions. And then we found out not only did he need a broker, but he needed someone to help him organize his affairs. By the time we got that person in place and started the process of getting the right application together, positioning it properly, applying to the right lenders, it was too close to maturity to make that happen immediately. Then there were some stumbling blocks where we just didn't get his credit didn't improve fast enough. We had to wait a little bit on that. So that's why we ended up in a 3 month extension instead of a one initially. And by the time we got the commitment from another lender, there was less than a month to go in the 3 month extension. So we actually had to extend for an additional month, and he closed in that month. So it ended up being about 15 and a half months, just under 16 months, but we needed two short extensions in order to help him through. Had we not got involved, I don't think I think this would have taken a lot longer. It would have cost him a lot more money, and there would have been potential for issues. There were two NSFs on this one too. Actually, you go to the next slide. I think it shows that there was, or is this the last slide? Is this the last slide? Yeah, there were two NSF payments in December and January for this one, and they were both caused by like I think the first one, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe both, were like payments to his from places he was getting money went into his account and were held. And so he thought he had the money in there in time. And then when our payment came out, it bounced because the money wasn't available to him actually yet. And so you think as a private lender, if you just kind of went to pull the payment and it bounced and you just let it go, you wouldn't know why it bounced. But by getting involved and talking to the borrower and finding out what happened, we're able to resolve both of these NSFs very quickly. And so, you kind of have a couple of bumps along the way here, but as you can see in the performance chart, I mean, every payment was made. It was made. All of them except two were made on time. The two that weren't were made within 5 business days of being on time, and it led to a successful exit in a reasonable period of time. Anything between 12 and 15 months is our target. This was slightly over that, but there was never any point where there was a panic on this or there was any real problem. These are acceptable issues in private lending. You get some borrowers that are overwhelmed with their financial situation and obligations and they miss something or they stumble. But if we're on top of them and we're working with them, right, to notify them, and we don't just leave it alone and let whatever happens. I see that all the time in private lending. It's crazy. You know, the power of a phone call. I tell our staff all the time: call first, then text, then email. Last resort, email. But pick up the phone, call people, find out what's going on in their life, see if you can help them through it. There's usually, first of all, nobody wants to lose their house, so everybody wants this to work. It's just a matter of proactively managing things.
Are the NSFs the reason why the credit took longer to recover?
No, because the NSFs wouldn't have been reported. They were resolved fast enough that they weren't reported to the bureau.
Okay. Well, what's the reason for that typically?
Uh, you know, the credit system is algorithmic, right? So
Yeah.
it's not you can look at the principles it's based on, right? And make some projections as to what kind of increase you'll get on a credit score if you do X, Y, and Z. But to try to predict it um, accurately, you know, very difficult. I mean, I always look at a range. So I will look at, is it reasonable to see a 50-point increase within 6 to 12 months?
Okay.
Not am I going to see a 50-point increase by January? You know
So
what I
if an
mean?
exit, yeah. So if an exit strategy is a refinance, like in the back of your
Mhm.
head, you're kind of giving yourself a couple months of buffer.
Yeah, I mean, and we also tell the borrower, like, if we're consolidating debt, for example, like, do not run it back up. Like, understand how the system is scoring you. People think, this is a common myth, if I pay my credit card off to zero, I'll get a bump in my score. But that's not how the system works. The system looks at your overall utilization of credit. So it would look at, let's say you had 5 credit cards, each with a $5,000 limit, and you had 4 of them at a zero balance and one was at its limit. You'd have a worse score that way than if all 5 were carrying $1,000. So
Hmm.
20% of their limit. So you're carrying the same debt, right? $5,000 of debt, but you're carrying $1,000 across 5 accounts. You're going to score a little bit better than having one at its limit, which looks like you're overutilizing. The other thing that people think is that if I don't use the credit at all, I'll score better. And that's not how the system works either. The system scores you for using responsibly. So it wants to see that you spent and paid back, spent and paid back. You'll get good boost from your score if you pay a 4-year lease in good standing the whole way, or pay a 4-year loan and you made every installment all the way along, and so on and so forth. So it wants to see that you're establishing a track record of good credit management, not, just this, you know, big payments and then run it all back up and then big payments. That's not
Yeah.
the idea. Yeah. So the credit system is unique, and it's not the easiest thing to predict, but you can predict reasonably within ranges. Okay, so the structure that made this work, very simple structure, because again, this was not one of those deals where we had so much complexity and really had to put on our thinking cap to try to figure out how to make this work. It was very straightforward. It was a $600,000 loan with a very straightforward purpose. We knew exactly what we wanted to do. We paid out those mortgages before closing. We made sure that the lawyers were handling the spousal payout properly. Title was transferred to the one borrower alone, and then everything was done properly. And the big key here was that we stayed involved with respect to helping that refinance happen by connecting the borrower to a solid broker who could do the right work. Remember, we have a conflict of interest to try to represent that person ourselves, so we could never represent them ourselves. So, but we do know a lot of brokers. They're the ones who bring us the private mortgages, the applications that we fund. So we know the difference between a very strong broker and a not so strong broker, and so we're able to introduce this person to a strong broker, and that's the difference to me. That's the whole difference in this deal. And again, you look at the capital structure; it couldn't gone better. And we got seven very happy investors who, when you ask them at month 16, we pay them back, and Jeff can attest to this. Their biggest question is, how soon can I find another one like this?
100%.
Yeah, it's the biggest concern when we pay them back.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
it's really funny. You look at the potential for things to go wrong here. They went through two NSFs, very brief, a 4-month extension. Like, these all things, if you didn't know, if you didn't hear me talk about them, and I just told you this is what happened without telling you that every payment was made, you got all the principal back, and you end up making 9.5 or 9% annualized. If you only heard that, this took 4 months longer than it was supposed to, there was two NSFs, we had to pay out a spouse, all this stuff, you might be concerned, right? And this is where private mortgages get this like stigma of being uber risky. But was there really ever a problem here? Was there really ever any doubt that these investors were going to get their money, all 9%, all their principal back? There just wasn't, right? And now it does require management at the front end to structure things properly and make sure we cross the right T's, dot the right I's. And then towards the end, getting involved not at maturity or after maturity, but 3 months before, 4 months before, and calling that borrower and finding out, are you working with someone? If you're not, let us connect you to someone. We got time on our side right now. Let's use it. A wise person once said, when you have time, utilize it wisely. So, it's just a matter of management and structure. You put those two things together, and this space, okay, in and of itself, private lending, it's fantastic. I mean, you got excellent collateral to support, a strong set of terms and conditions. It is more than likely you are going to have a very smooth ride with the right management. So, what do we learn from a deal like this, right? First and foremost, we learn this every time we do a mortgage. Things change, they always do. You should expect it, okay? You should never expect something to be perfect. It's never going to go perfect. There's always going to be things to manage. Applications are always going to have problems. In this case, there were a couple missed payments, there were delays, there was extensions, but all manageable. Okay. Sloppy lender might have panicked, fearful lender might have enforced too soon, right? And then you run into additional costs, additional issues that don't necessarily need to be there, but it's really because of a lack of structure or a lack of management on your part. Okay, we rely on strong equity, obviously try to lend as little as possible against the asset. But when we have to, we'll go as high as 80% of the value and still feel very comfortable there. But in this case, we had an extra cushion to be able to be at 67. Most importantly, we stayed engaged, right? Not just, it's amazing, the mentality sometimes is, oh, I got the house as collateral. I don't need to do anything. I just lend the money and leave it alone, set it and forget it. And you can do that. You can. In fact, you can be sloppy in private mortgages and still get away with it. But will the ride be bumpier? In my estimation, in most cases, yes, it will. There will be bumps. There will be irritation and small problems that are overcomable, like NSFs, that can be resolved in 2 or 3 days if you just pay close attention to them. They can turn into defaults and then into enforcement and then into a mess and a loss of communication because now the borrower was afraid to talk to you and a breakdown happens. Now you got to go through the court system. It takes 7 or 8 months. You still get your money back? Probably at 67% loan to value. But the ride, it's just like the amount of frustration and irritation just piles up. So you don't need to have it. Okay. And I mean, outside of that, like, again, I can't say it enough. The skill in this space is in identifying situations that are repairable. And if you can do that well, and you can manage to put a good structure in place and then manage it through to the end, you'll do very, very well.
What would have been a cause for a fearful lender to enforce? You're saying if they didn't want to extend for 4 months?
Yeah, like panicking because someone missed a payment, like a payment when NSF. When a payment
People
goes NSF,
enforce people enforce over NSFs?
no, it doesn't go like that. But what happens is an NSF, here's how it goes. You don't manage the NSF well, and then very soon that turns into a breakdown in communication. So you don't get the payment. Maybe you send a default notice. They don't respond to that. Now you've got, in order to bring the mortgage back up to date, the borrower has to pay the payment plus the NSF charge plus the default charge. They can't do that. And then within 30 days, another payment is due. And now they lap themselves. And now you have no choice because you don't know what to do. So you call the lawyer, and the lawyer goes, okay, don't worry. I'll just issue a statement of claim and a notice of sale. And they start the ball rolling. Why? Well, because that's how they make money, right? We'll just take it. They're not going to call the borrower and start negotiating. They're just going to send a demand notice and then start enforcing the security. And now you end up in this like mess of a situation that really never needed to be a mess because somebody just missed the payment. Something, a payment bounced. There was money there. In this case, the money was there. It's just it wasn't accessible. Nobody
I see.
calls them. We don't find out. And you know how fast a borrower, it's amazing, right? How fast a borrower will break down communication.
I can
Like,
imagine.
right? Like just think of it. Think if somebody owes you money.
Mhm.
Well, does it become harder or easier to get a hold of them?
Harder, yeah.
Right? Like they owe you money. They know they owe you money. And so like this is where like you call, they don't answer. You text, they ghost you. It's just like it's not just in this space, right? It's in everything. I can remember times when I was younger where like, I missed a payment on my credit card and it was like RBC, and then I see RBC calling me, and I would not pick up the phone, but I'd go make the payment, right? Like I got the message just from seeing RBC on my phone. So it's like, the collateral is very powerful. You just have to maintain communication. I think we do that very, very well. And we're like compassionate and nice. Like we welcome the conversation, keep a line of communication open for exactly situations like this. In fact, we tell people, hey, if your payment's going to bounce, just call us ahead of time and like we'll work something out. Obviously you can't do it every month. If you do it every month, it's a pattern. Now there's a problem, but you know, like we can work with people. We know they want to pay. Why? Because they don't want to lose the house. That's why they came to us in the first place. So if you manage well, you'll be okay. Most problems are solvable. Would you agree, Jeff? I mean, you deal with it all
100%.
the time.
Yeah, 100%. Borrowers are in constant contact with us, right? So
Yeah.
have one today, and he texted me back immediately. It was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's our job.
yeah.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, our job is to make sure that borrowers are aware of their options, the deadlines, and the consequences. That's our job. Make sure that they are constantly made aware and reminded of options, deadlines, and consequences. If we do that, it's amazing how the behavior changes. Borrowers, when they know what their options are, they choose one. When they know what the deadlines are, they usually meet them. And when they know what the consequences are, it gives them incentive to not experience the consequences. And sometimes you do have to go through the consequences. I mean, the one you were just talking about, Jeff, is a great example. This is a borrower who has missed multiple payments, has always caught up, but we had to go all the way once to the lawyer stage just so the borrower could realize there's a difference in dealing with the lawyer than dealing with us. And now, I'm sure when Jeff talks to him, you can speak to this, Jeff. It's like his deterrence is he doesn't want to talk to the lawyer, right? Like,
He actually makes his own payment plan up now. It's fantastic. Hey, if I pay by Friday, am I good? No problem, sir. You're
yeah,
okay.
he does not want the letter or the call from the lawyer because he
Yep.
knows that costs more. It's a worse consequence, and so on. So it's really just holding people accountable, right? And being clear about what the commitment is at the beginning, what the terms are, the conditions. Like, we go through a whole process, right, where we issue a proposal first, not a commitment. A proposal. And when I issue a proposal, I'm saying to the broker, share this with the borrower and come back and tell us if they are okay with the terms and they can satisfy the conditions. If they can, we'll move to the next stage and we'll put it all into a formal agreement we call a mortgage commitment. And before they sign that, they'll take it to a lawyer and get independent legal advice to make sure there's no ambiguity, there's no confusion. It's clear, right? They understand the options, they understand the deadlines, they understand the consequences, and so on and so forth. And we maintain that all the way through. So instead of becoming the bad guy, you're just keeping people accountable to an agreement they made that can benefit them if they do things that they said they were going to do. Look, if somebody at the beginning says, I have no idea how I'm going to get back to a bank, we say, well, we are not going to lend you money, right? Unless they say, well, I'm not planning to go back to a bank, I'm planning to sell. Okay, that's a defined exit too. But if they don't know where they're going, they shouldn't be in private. They should sell because you're just eroding equity. So it's a matter of being very clear with people, letting them understand where the boundaries are, and then holding them accountable to their obligations, you know? And if it's not working, the good thing is, if you thought you'd be able to refinance, if we thought the plan was good, and then 7, 8 months go by and something changes or something is different and now it doesn't work, we can always still sell the property and we don't have to do it for them. They can make that decision. So when you keep that line of communication open, you always can have that dialogue where you can say, it doesn't feel like it's working. You know, are you sure you don't want to sell? And a lot of times they will say, I think it's time. We tried, it didn't work. I think it's time. And they do it before it gets to a default or before maturity comes and they have no options and so on. So lots of ways out if you establish that communication line, and if you understand, both parties understand that this is short-term money, and if it becomes long-term money or it starts to look like it's become long-term money, there is a way out, and that's to sell the property, voluntarily.
Secret sauce number 2, keep the communication lines open and keep the
That's
waters
it.
calm.
That's it. I think that's it for this one. Okay.
Until next time.
Happy lending.